All right, friends, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have the return of Richard X. Heyman, singer-songwriter extraordinaire, drummer by trade. First band was the Doughboys, and he's filled in and played with a ton of amazing artists. Link Wray, Brian Wilson, Benny King, with legends, definers of our modern music. He was in it, man. He grew up around it. And, like, that's a primary source, you know? But anywho, Richard has a new album out. It's called 67,000 Miles Per Album. I don't know why symbolically that one trips me up, but 67,000 miles per album. It's available now on all streaming platforms. There's a cool Kickstarter campaign, and if you donate certain amounts, you get cool prizes like bonus tracks. He talks about that a little bit near the end of this interview, but we're going to check out one track. We're going to check out, this is Traveling Salesman off 67,000 miles per album. Richard X. Heyman. Richard X. Heyman, Traveling Salesman, 67,000 miles per album, available now on all streaming platforms. A rocker, right? But this album goes everywhere. It hits a lot of melodic, beautiful tunes. Very Richard style, and I recommend you guys listen to it. Before we get to this conversation, we got to the story, which was absurd. I want you guys to imagine what it would be like to go to a Guitar Center for drumsticks, and then you hear and see Jimi Hendrix playing with Frank Zappa, and they're talking about shop. They're talking guitars. Then you walk over to them. What do you say? Right? Well, that's what happened to Richard. It wasn't Guitar Center, but the equivalent to whatever a music shop was around in the 60s. Anywho, that's a really epic story. And we got some cool Pete Townsend stories, too. If you guys can like, rate, review, subscribe to any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Richard and sharing insights and stories and inspiration with you. And yeah, without further ado, friends, thank you so much. Here we go. This is my conversation with Richard X. Heyman. But anywho, super glad to talk to you again, my friend.
I'm glad to be here.
And 67,000 miles an album is a great record. I got the advanced from Howard, and I remember because last time we were talking with Copious,
thank you.
With Copious Notes, you were kind of saying you were kind of in a funk a little bit before Copious Notes.
I was.
And wasn't sure if there was going to be another one, so I was super glad.
I wasn't either, but I just kind of jumped right back into it.
Yeah? Was doing that last record, was doing Copious Notes, kind of getting in the grind of getting the tracks out and layering everything, and like it just kept it going? Or what was the process after you finished Copious Notes?
I think I had some things left over, some drum tracks, and I just figured I'd try filling those drum tracks in with the songs that went with them. And once I started that, I kind of got the whole bug again to write. And I started writing new material, and I was combining that with the stuff that I already had left over from the past album. So I was good to go. I just started laying down more and more stuff, and next thing I knew, I had a 15-song album.
Nice. What was some tracks that didn't make Copious Notes that made 67,000?
All the songs that I had written for the Doughboys were from a session of drum tracks that I had done previous to Copious Notes. I could have been on Copious Notes. And so that would be Traveling Salesman, 2nd Street, Exit Homestead, Surefire, Crave, and History. So I had a lot of,
yeah.
I think there's 5 or 6 of those type of songs on 67,000. So they could have easily been done on the last album, but for some reason I just didn't get to them.
In the Doughboys, they're working on something as well. That this was kind of like going on at the same time, or
No, the Doughboys had broken up by that point. These were songs that they had included on past albums.
God,
And I wanted to try my version of the same songs because I wrote them, and I figured I'd give it a shot. So I those drum tracks down. So that's how that started, and then this album kind of was inspired partially because I had those drum tracks left over, and once I started filling them in with guitars and vocals, I was on my way to this album. So, but what happens whenever you have kind of these self-induced deadlines or obligations, at least for me, I just start creating more, and I get into a writer's mode. So I wrote all the most of the more melodic type songs on this album are pretty recently written, except for a couple that are very old.
what was it? Oh, because that makes listening through it. There seems to be there's ones that have these lush harmonies really, really built around the melody, and then it goes to like a rocker. Like Traveling Salesman was like, I'm like, that's a jam, that's cool. And then not that all the other ones weren't cool, but it was just like it has this cool ebb and flow on this record of going through this. So that makes sense that it was part of the kind of tunnel vision of writing when you get into that.
Yeah, well, what happens is a lot of times I'll go for a more homogeneous concept. And Nancy, my wife, says, no, you got to mix it up. Variety is good. So she kind of is responsible for that, for kind of that back and forth between the blues tinge, grittier stuff and the melodic ones. Because I kind of wanted at some point to just make an album of all really melodic pop from beginning to end. But she thinks that it's better to mix it up, so I that's what I've been doing. I gotta listen to her.
Was it? Well, she's not wrong. Like I enjoyed the ebb and flow of the record for sure. And it's kind of it's kind of like a concert, You wanna if you get them all like in one mood. But records can be moods.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. I like albums like the American Rubber Soul by the Beatles had a very folksy, acoustic feel about it from beginning to end, even though there's some rockers on there. But it still gave you that warm, kind of woody feeling. So I always like that. But you have there's Beatle albums like Revolver where you have Paul doing those really lush, beautiful songs here, there, and everywhere for no one, and then John's doing Tomorrow Never Knows, and Andrew Bird can sing. So there's quite a variety there. So there's definitely something to be said, like you said, about this ebb and flow of taking the listener to different places, which I kind of get.
No, definitely for sure on the record, but but yeah, I don't know. The Beatles, they kind of forefronted a lot of things with even the track numbers, right? Like the amount of tracks per record, and it would make sense that we can find them finding their ebbs and flows, but they have the multiple songwriter thing. I think that's gonna always have that kind of ebb and flow. Oh, that's the Ringo song,
Yeah.
Very cool. Did so with this one song that stuck out in not one but one in the particular lineup, Washington, thinking
Washington.
Yeah, taking it from his perspective. I thought that was a really cool songwriting point. I'm gonna guess that's a reflection on current times, but was that for a Copious batch or was that for a 67,000 batch?
That's a new song. That was a new song specifically for this album, And it kind of, I had like most of my songs, I have the music first, and a lot of these were written on piano. Just kind of playing it over and over again, and then suddenly some little lyrical pop into my head, like Washington Rock. Once I heard that in my head, that was like, oh, okay, that's the place in New Jersey where I grew up, and there was this historical vista, and you know, it was a big tradition in Plainfield, New Jersey, where I grew up, to go up to Washington Rock and look out. You could see Manhattan on a clear day, and it was a really interesting place to go because it was mixed with history, because George Washington used that as a lookout. But then as I wrote the different verses, I thought, this is also about my father taking me up there, and George Washington's the father of our country, and so it's a song about fathers. And it's also a little bit of a history lesson in what took place there and why Washington was there. So that it was a fun little project to just get that all out into one song.
Yeah. I thought it was very well written. And that's cool knowing the your personal history with that. Like it's interesting. Like I've talked to a couple people recently that have taken songwriting into a certain spot, and like just I don't know if it's a practice just to really try to like, because when you're writing musically or lyrically for music, you have to trim the fat of a lot of things and hit points really quickly. So is that like part of the process, is kind of writing out these memories and trimming what works? Or are you fitting it to the melody?
I mean, I've been at this for a while, so I kind of know the tricks of how to kind of get a more succinct thought from a recollection, let's say, or a personal history, or some storytelling. Songs are either telling stories or a personal introspection, looking inward. And so, excuse me. So I try to, just get right to the point, and then there's the whole kind of mechanics of writing. I mean, there's a rhyme scheme and a rhythm scheme, and you have to have the right amount of syllables and beats. So it's all kind of like what they call songcraft, I guess. But I don't really think that much about it as I'm doing it. It just kind of, hopefully, is going to naturally fall into place.
That checks out. I don't know. Like it seems like if you're plunking along and like playing, and then the lyric comes from that symbolically and all that technology, like all that kind of tech approach to writing will kind of line up with itself. Now, do you dip?
Yeah,
Was it?
Go on.
Sorry, I was gonna say.
I could keep about it, but go on.
No. Like I would love to hear it.
No, what I was about to say is, when I'm playing piano, I just start kind of getting into a trance-like state and try out different things and chord progressions, and that comes very naturally. And then, a little lyrical idea will pop in there. But then I have to kind of get the pad out and sit down and really think about how to get it done. That part of it, getting the lyrics to fit the music so it sounds like they're married to each other, is a bit of work. That's, at least for me, that's where I have to struggle a little bit and get it right. What seems to match up with the music. So that part of it is, a little more in the kind of work ethic mode where I got to get it done. But something like Washington Rock, I knew what I kind of wanted to say. I had to do a little historic research to make sure what I was saying was actually true.
Right. That's like, is it? I can't, because I know you play bits of everything, and drums were your main. Did was it always piano that you write with? Or?
Oh no, it's about half and half between piano and guitar.
Okay.
But I have a piano that's it's got a built-in, it's an electric piano, and it's got a built-in speaker, so you don't have to like do anything except turn it on and you're ready to play.
Right.
So whenever I even get in the mood to play, I just normally hit that on button on the piano, and there it is. I got piano sounds right there. I have a few guitars laying around, which occasionally I pick up, but mainly now it seems like whenever I pick up a guitar, I'm practicing playing lead guitar, trying to learn more about playing blues and things like that. But I've done my share of writing on guitar, mainly on acoustic guitar. But this album, most of these songs were written on piano, and then I turn them into guitar songs.
Got it. I don't know. There's something to the convenience of an instrument in its placement wherever you reside, right? If the guitar's in the case, there's that. It's a minor thing, but that unboxing of the case will let you walk right by.
A lot of people are just naturally lazy.
Aside from that,
yeah, I have a few guitars that I keep out on stands so they're ready to go, but I don't know. I've been playing more piano lately. Let's just put it that way. But I get a real joy out of turning the piano songs into guitar songs, because all the good things that you do on a piano aren't what you would ever think to do on a guitar. So then when you pick up the guitar and you try to learn, that arpeggio that I played on the piano, it's so far into the guitar, but when you get it done, it's so interesting to me because you have something original and different. A lot of these songs, like Washington Rock, all those guitar parts are really piano parts played on guitar.
It is because how the piano is laid out to do like certain inversions or arpeggios or like on the guitar, it really makes it distinct. I agree with that. It's interesting. I listened to this interview actually from two sources recently. This has been kind of on my mind. That whole idea of taking one instrument and transferring it to another. With Danny Gatton, are you familiar with that guitar player?
Yeah, sure.
He would take a bunch of organ things, like organ approaches, and play them on the guitar, which made a really weird inversions or weird movements. And Victor Wooten also spoke like on I forget which some lesson thing he put out a long time ago about like taking a saxophone and playing it on your bass, or taking a piano and playing it, and like that's such a musical concept, and that to me, I feel like a lot of times you get hunkered down by the language or vocabulary of the instrument, which would make sense. Like when you pick up guitar, you want to work on guitar licks, you want to work on blues, because that's the guitar.
Right.
That's you got to know some vocab to be able to be like, I'm here, But on piano, I mean, there's definitely vocab for it, but the transfer between the two is such a cool, musically exciting and original kind of place,
It's a lot of fun because once you get a piano arpeggio or chord or riff on the guitar, it sounds like something that's never been done before. It's kind of a thrill to hear.
Yeah.
You've got this riff now that no one else has ever thought to play before, and I get a kick out of that. And, especially if I get to use it in a song on the recordings.
And just I don't know, even the analog, because the guitar is so blocky, it's so shape and pattern based. And so, so is the piano, but in like a more laid out, clear way.
Yeah.
And to
I was going to say, a good example on the new album is the first song, You Can Tell Me, which is a total piano song.
Right.
And then I learned it on the guitar, note for note, and the piano is still in there, but you mainly hear the guitars. I don't know what the listener's actually hearing, because I know what's in there. There's Rickenbacker 12 string, there's some 6 strings, there's the piano. It's all mixed together. and they're all playing basically the same thing.
It's definitely a wall of sound for sure. And it's interesting because, like, now knowing that from your perspective, it's coming from this piano approach. When I listened to it for the first time, I kind of like, oh, this is like got fusion-y vibes. You know what I mean? Like this has got some fusion
Figured
vibes.
out, yeah, some friends have said that. I think because, first of all, let me just tell you that song was written when I was 17 years old.
Yeah.
Back way, way, way back in time. One of the first songs I ever wrote.
Huh.
And it's been kind of in the background for all these decades because I couldn't quite put it all together lyrically. And I tried recording it with different lyrics, and I just never could get it to work. So I finally felt like I got some new lyrics that are going to work. And, I tried it for this album finally, and it all seemed to come together for me, especially putting the Rickenbacker guitars, playing those piano arpeggios. I thought that was an interesting, slant on it. So that's kind of what we've been talking about, where it's a piano arpeggio played on guitar that I don't think any guitar player would naturally do, because you have to really, it's a little convoluted as far as, learning how to play it.
Right. It's weird. It's like playing something on banjo on piano. On banjo it makes sense because of how it's laid out. Like on piano, you're not gonna ring that extra high note just for the fun of it,
right.
or drone that high note.
I mean, if you have a guitar and you play, let's say, a G chord, and you just kind of arpeggiate right down from the low string to the high, there's an order of strings and notes you're hitting that you wouldn't do that on the piano, and vice versa. So right there, a natural arpeggio on one instrument is foreign to the other.
But that's what I think really made this record stick out, because listening from Copious Notes to 67,000, it's like it's you. It's all around you. Like, but it's cool to have these distinct like approaches. Did any of like the writing for this album kind of come from the bonus stuff you were doing for Copious Notes, like how you guys were doing the like just piano takes of songs off Copious Notes for the Patreon, I believe, or just like vocal takes?
Well, like I said earlier, I think the initial inspiration was the drum tracks that were left over that we hadn't gotten to. That's what kind of triggered this. I wanted to complete those songs. And the first one I did was Traveling Salesman, and I got so excited about it because I thought it came out, pretty close to what I was looking for. We were on our way to making a new album at that point, because it's like, okay, let's do another one. And then we did like, Crave, and we did a bunch of but at the same time, in between that, I was writing these new, more melodic songs. So, if there was one we were real excited about, we'd start recording that. And so...
Okay. Are you guys going to do bonus stuff like you did for Copious Notes with this record?
Well, we're going to have the vocals only. What are we going to have? Yeah, Nancy too. We're going to have instrumental tracks and I think a cappella. And then we have a couple, a few songs that didn't fit on the record, so we have those. So yeah, there's a few things we're going to put together.
Oh, cool. Was it because I remember last time we talked that process, you seemed to be really kind of moved by that, taking apart some of those things and playing them in different ways. So it's cool that it's sticking around.
Yeah, it's kind of become just a method that I use, not exclusively, but it's something that every now and then just seems to work.
Very cool. One thing on kind of a off-album topic question.
Yeah.
Because I listened back to our other conversation, and I don't think I really asked about your time at Cafe Wah as the house band.
Okay. We got the gig, and I can't remember. I think it was like, I don't know if it was every night of the week or 6 nights a week, but it was, most of the week. And there were different acts on the bill. There'd be a comedian. We were like the main musical act of the night throughout most of that summer. But there was a hypnotist. I remember that. And I remember one night, my sister came in with a friend of hers, and the guy hypnotized my sister's friend. I thought that was kind of fun.
Did it work? Was she really hypnotized, or were you?
I think she thought she was a chicken or something. And then there was a comedian who was kind of like Lenny Bruce style. I liked him, but he didn't seem to be going over that big. But and I'm trying to think. Occasionally there might have been like a folk singer or something that came in, but we were the main musical act. And at that point, the Doughboys were a three-piece, so we were kind of like a power trio. And this is at the height of like Jimi Hendrix and Cream. I remember one night Felix Pappalardi, the producer of Cream, came in to see us.
Yeah.
That was exciting.
Did you meet him?
Yeah, he was very complimentary of my drumming, and that was cool.
That's a big deal. He's listening to Ginger Baker, man. That's cool.
Yeah, I was playing, I'm pretty sure, I was playing double bass drum there.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's a small stage, but somehow I got my double bass drum set up on that stage. It's funny because I was really inspired by Ginger Baker and Keith Moon as far as playing with a double bass, and then I went to see Jimi Hendrix, and Mitch Mitchell was playing the single kick drum.
Ah.
And I got so excited about that and inspired that I went back to that style. And I never played double bass again.
The car and the loads in were way one kick drum lighter. Was it
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of load, a lot of schlepping. But it was a fun experience. We all stayed at a place called the Albert Hotel, which was a few blocks away, and had a lot of escapades. And got to meet Pete Townsend one night, who was hanging out in one of the rooms with a band called the Blues Magoos, who were like a local village band.
What was that like? Was Pete cool?
Well, I wrote about this in my book. It's a whole to-do. It was just, we were living on a different floor. I can't remember why we were down on their floor, but I think what it was is we got back from the gig, the Cafe Wah, and we saw the Who's tour bus was parked in front of the hotel where we were staying. So we knew something was up. And we figured that he was probably with this band, the Blues Magoos. So sure enough, he was in their room playing acoustic guitar, giving them like a little performance. And we kept trying to go in, and they wouldn't let us in. And the door was partially open. We got to listen, and we could see him. And at some point, they asked us to go to the deli and get them some sandwiches. So we figured, okay, that's our ticket to get in, and we got back with the sandwiches, and they still wouldn't let us in. So we were kind of miffed, and we were all sitting on the floor in the hallway in front of the door. These big water bugs crawling all over us, and we were from New Jersey. We never saw a cockroach before, so we were a little taken aback. But we got to hear all the music, and we could see him, and that was the extent of it. But it was still exciting.
And was it just like Who tunes that were
Yeah, he
out?
was doing stuff from the Who Sell Out. He was playing Tattoo and a couple songs from that era. So that was cool.
That's super cool. The kind of hear behind because he's the mastermind of a lot of the or all the Who stuff, and like the kind of hear just him do that. Wow.
Yeah, it was very exciting. And then many decades later, I met him because I was signed to the same publishing company as him.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got to meet him backstage at a Who concert at Madison Square Garden, and I mentioned to him how I saw him
Yeah.
back, at the Albert Hotel playing with the Blues Magoos, and I told him I saw the first appearance of the Who in America, which I did, and he didn't believe a word of it. He was, I don't know why, that night I must have eaten a lot of healthy food or something, because he said, "Nah, you're too young, you couldn't have been there." No, I said, "Oh, no, I was there."
You're like, remember those sandwiches?
Yeah, right. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have had those sandwiches.
Oh wow. Is the Blues Magoos guy still around?
I don't know. I think maybe a couple of them died. I don't know. I don't really know their history that well, but they had a big hit record. You ain't seen nothing yet. It was no, that's not. What was it called? Yeah. Do, 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 do. We ain't seen nothing yet. Something like that. Anyway, they had like a top 10 hit.
Nice. What is it? So that's cool. That's crazy. He didn't believe you. Um, but
Yeah, I know. It's really a traumatic experience when you meet one of your heroes and they think you're lying to them. Yeah, I don't usually approach celebrities. The only reason I was talking to them was I was backstage and they were having like a little kind of backstage party, and some woman came up to me and asked if I would go up to Pete and ask for an autograph for her because she was too nervous. So I said, all right. So I went up with a piece of paper and I explained. She's like, an autograph, and I'm standing there. So the next thing I got to do is start,
telling the story.
conversation of some kind.
Yeah.
I made the mistake, because when you meet a celebrity, they've heard it all, and it's like you just should give them a little bit of a compliment and move on. But a lot of people, their instinct is to relate to when they saw them, so you'll say, "Oh, I saw you at such and such a concert. I was there." They don't want to hear that. They don't care. Where he just got done playing this incredible concert of, that was a Quadrophenia, and it was a great show, and I should have complimented him on the show, and I didn't even think to do that. I was like so nervous. I just said, I saw your first show in America. And he goes, no, you didn't. I said, yeah, I did. Oh, you're too young. And then I started telling him about the Blues Magoos. It was downhill from there.
Yeah, it's weird, some people, because you see some people really light up on that, like, and then some people are like, So I guess it really depends on the person, but I agree. I definitely think the person that whatever they just did, just like any artist, even if it's like someone that big, they're still probably in their head about it a little bit, That land,
right.
That stick. Are you here just because of what I did or what I'm doing?
Right. Well, when you meet somebody that has this amazing legacy and they've accomplished so many things, it's like, where do you begin? But I guess you're right. I think the best thing to do is just compliment them on the show they just did or the record they just put out, because that's what everybody wants to hear.
Right. That their work still is good and is as exciting.
I know. It's like I have this new album out. The last thing I want to hear is somebody saying, "Oh, I really loved, the Cornerstone album," or It's like I appreciate it, but I want to hear about the new album. We just put all this work into it.
Right. Well, I mean, that is a good album, and not to, but that's where it grows to where you are now, and like that's what's amazing about what you're doing now is like every project, because diving through what you've done to get to the new record. 67,000 miles. I don't know why that's tripping me up symbolically today. But you can hear that progression and the idea that this one might sound more fusiony. I think it's super cool because that's heightened like musicality, but the songwriting and the luscious melodies are all still there. Um, one other quick. Did you jam with Jimi Hendrix?
No, I
Okay.
think the bass player in the Doughboys.
Okay. I was wondering. I had that bit written down, and I was like, I don't know. So
I
okay,
met I met him
you met
and
him?
had a yeah, I met Jimi Hendrix and had a nice conversation with him, and he was very nice. And he was with Frank Zappa at the time, so I got a double whammy. I got both their autographs, got to talk to both of them, so that was very exciting.
What was it? What was that combo like?
I walked into Manny's music store here in New York, and they were just about to close the store. I was buying some drumsticks for a little kind of audition session the Doughboys were about to do. And I hear this guitar wailing in the back of the store. And the store is empty. They're just kind of getting ready to close up. And I walk back there, and it's Jimi Hendrix. He's sitting there. And standing up beside him is Frank Zappa. So, I'm not leaving. I go back, I bought my drumsticks, and I went back there, and I just sat down and listened to him play. And then he stopped, and he was talking a little bit to Frank, and then I joined in and asked a few questions. Never asked anybody before in my life for an autograph, but I said, I can't miss this opportunity. I got a napkin and a pen, and they both signed it on one napkin. Jimmy's was Be Groovy, Jimi Hendrix. And Frank said, thank you, Frank Zappa.
What were they talking about? Was Hendrix showing them stuff and
Right, he was trying out a Les Paul.
Huh?
He was playing, which you don't usually associate with him. And it was
Right.
a right-hand Les Paul, and he was wailing away. And I guess they were talking about, guitars and stuff. And at that point, I barely played guitar. I was mainly a drummer. But I just thought I got to say something. So I said, "Did you ever try to seek out a left-handed Les Paul instead of playing a right-handed one?" And he goes, "Yeah, I know they have them, but he says, I prefer the right-handed ones. I like the way it feels upside down."
And
And
Zap,
then, to top off the story, about 6 months later, I was filling in on drums for some band that was opening for the Mothers of Invention at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and backstage and standing next to Frank Zappa, and I reminded him how I met him at Manny's with Jimi Hendrix, and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember." And he was very nice, and he was really complimentary of my drum solo that I had just done. He told me, he says, "You have the fastest foot I have ever heard in my life." Talking about, all that.
yeah. Was that with the double bass? Did you double bass that gig?
No, that was with the single.
Man.
But I developed this thing, kind of like a John Bonham style kind of thing, where you do very fast riffs on the kick drum
Like
and the
triplet
tom skin.
things?
Yeah, it sounds kind of like double bass, but it's just one.
They had to get that compliment from Zappa because he can be a tough critic. Wow, man, that's so
I
cool.
know. I was in high school at the time. I just wanted to quit high school and go on the road with the Mothers.
And man, to see the Mothers at that like beginning of a stage, wow, that had to be epic too.
Oh yeah, it was so many great concerts in that era. I mean, I was fortunate to grow up just as rock and roll was getting really interesting with, the advent of the quality PA systems like they had at the Fillmore East. Because I saw early rock concerts where it was more about the event. I saw the Beatles a few times, and Dave Clark Five and the Stones, and those were just exciting. They were filled with screaming girls, and the fact that you're seeing these superstars was amazing. But then right after that, right around basically right when the Beatles stopped touring, around 67, all of a sudden these really good quality PA systems were being used. And then you go to like the Fillmore, and it sounded like a record. And it was like, oh, why didn't the Beatles, stick around long enough to play these kind of quality gigs where you could really get into the music side of things?
Probably because they when people would go see them, they're like, we need a better thing. Like, no one can hear anything.
Oh, yeah, no, it was definitely coming.
Yeah.
I remember, like just in the bands that I grew up with, everybody would get these column PAs. They were like these thin columns that would have maybe 4 speakers in each one. I don't know if you're familiar with those PAs, but those were the first PAs that most groups used. And then they start to get this thing called the voice of the theater, which were the speakers they used in movie theaters for the audio. And there were these big black boxes that had a 15-inch speaker, a big horn. And that became the state-of-the-art PA. And then they just kind of progressed from there. And by the time they were putting PAs in places like the Fillmore, they really knew what they were doing. And they had these audio experts just designing the greatest sounding PAs. So it didn't matter how loud the band was, you'd still hear everything balanced and clear. And I saw some of the greatest shows there, like The Who and Jimi Hendrix and Procol Harum. And the acoustic in there was so great.
Yeah. Is that the first place experiencing one of those PAs? Do you remember the first band where it was like, this is a record live?
Yeah, well, even before the Fillmore, the Fillmore itself was called the Village Theater, and I saw Cream there. I think that was the first show I saw, and that already had a really good quality sound. There was a place called the Anderson Theater, which was across the street, down the block from the Fillmore, and they had a good sounding system, and I saw the Yardbirds there. I think it was 67. So that was the very beginning of that kind of quality. It was kind of, before that, these bands would come, even the top bands, and they would just use whatever PA, the venue had.
Right. Well, what are you going to do? Carry, that's a lot to bring, It's enough to bring the band and all the things you need on stage, let alone the stage.
Yeah, I know, but that's, now the norm. That's what everybody brings, their own stage and their own PA. So it really progressed. But I remember sitting in the Fillmore many times thinking, God, if only the Beatles could have played here and we could have sat and just listened to them do their thing with this sound. That would have been amazing, but just wasn't to be.
Still, to see them though, that's pretty cool, man.
Oh yeah, real thrill.
A couple more questions. I really appreciate your time. Where did the 67 miles per album title come from? Because it's like Copious Notes. It's catchy and thoughtful, man.
Well, I guess at some point we all, especially now with the internet, but I just somehow knew from some source that the planet Earth is moving through space at 67,000 miles an hour, and it's circling the sun in its orbit. That's how fast we're going. Even though everything seems so calm and still, we are literally, speeding through space. And I thought, kind of interesting, that means like in an hour, we've literally moved 67,000 miles. I thought if I make an album that's around an hour long, the listener, by the time he's done listening, will have traveled on this trip of 67,000 miles. I just thought that was interesting.
That's really cool.
So that was kind of the thought process.
Very cool. That's awesome. I love it. I love it, man.
I like to feel, put that into people's heads that if they sit down and listen to this album, or, they can be doing anything they want for an hour, but in this particular case, they'd be listening to this album knowing that by the time they get to the last song, they literally have traveled 67,000 miles. That's a long ways. That's a major trip.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny. I was just talking with a student about this idea, the idea of relativity, right? The idea that you're in one spot, flying, moving that fast, but it feels like nothing. And
right.
That it's such a, kind of like simple but profound concept when you really kind of think about that. And to put it in concept of like listening to one record and to know I think that's a really thoughtful, profound way to like kind of put a record, man. That's cool.
Oh, thank you. I kind of stumbled upon the pun because when I thought it's 67,000 miles an hour, and then I changed hour to album, which kind of sounds like, so you have this slight, it's not a great pun, but it's still kind of in the tradition of a lot of my album titles that have puns built in.
I love it, man. Well, beautiful, my friend. Well, Richard, thank you so much for your time, and I, as always, enjoyed digging into your career, and I look forward to talking to you for the next one. Is there any like drum tracks hanging for this next record?
There are actually still a few more of those kind of garage rock style ones that I laid down a lot of tracks, I guess, because there's still a bunch of those. So we're going to do a couple of those for at least bonus tracks for this album for the Kickstarter people that got that level of contribution. Yeah. So we're going to actually work on one of those, I think, this weekend. And
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig of the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.